I would say leadership philosophy starts with that, and then it goes into how can I show up with faith, hope, and love every day and love the people that I get to and am honored to lead. And it's like, yeah, I want to give of everything that I have in service to others, but at the same time, I want to do it in an infinitely sustainable
What's
way.
going on, everybody? Hey, you just heard a clip of the guy I just interviewed. His name is Mark Paulson. He lives in Denver, Colorado, and he is awesome. And on this episode, we're talking about leading in the workplace and leading in home. Mark is a leadership expert with a leadership business of his own, and then he has 5 kids that all love the Lord, they love God, they follow Jesus, and he created a culture in his home that allowed that to happen as they become adults. You're going to learn a lot from this episode. I learned a lot. This is an episode where I came in expecting to ask questions that I wanted to know the answer to. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope this blesses you.
Those of you who are listening who are wondering who we're talking about, you've heard me mention Dallas Willard. He's my favorite Christian philosopher, incredible author, and he co-wrote at least one book, I think 2. And then I think Gary Black Jr. actually wrote another book about Dallas Willard. And you got to meet him.
Yeah.
And which is amazing. And so I've always pictured Gary Black Jr. I've never Googled him. Don't know how old he is. I've always pictured him as a guy who is about 38 years old.
Okay.
With a mustache, thick black hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that close?
He was older than that when I met him. And this would have been probably like 2017, 2018. So we walk in and Mindy had told me he's a professor at the Honors College at Azusa Pacific. That's when I met him. And APU's close to Pasadena. In Pasadena? I don't know. Anyway, I walk in and he's sitting there at a high table with his laptop open and his glasses down, his reading glasses down, looking very scholarly and very professor like. I probably would put him around. He probably was around 45, 50 years old at that point. So
okay. Yeah. Well, amen.
Yeah. It's a joy.
This is Mark Paulson, who I met through we have a mutual friend named Amar. He was on the podcast. And Amar, if you've watched our episode or if you've heard me talk about him, he's the happiest and friendliest guy in the world. And he loves connecting people. And he started this small group that was online for people who have started stuff. That's how I met Mark. And me and Mark, turns out, actually switched homes. I live in Massachusetts. You used to live in Massachusetts. And now you're in Colorado, where I used to be.
That's right.
So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us where in Colorado you are.
So I am smack between Denver and Boulder. So there's the Denver-Boulder Turnpike, which is 36. I am halfway between both. So 20 minutes to Boulder, 20 minutes to Denver in a burb called Broomfield.
Yes. The Highway 36 right coming into Boulder is one of my favorite views in all of Colorado.
Oh yeah. It's breathtaking. You get to that scenic overlook. They have a turn off right there. You can hop off. You can take all your pictures. People do it all day, every day. It is gorgeous.
And avoid Boulder altogether.
No. Actually, I have a bias towards Boulder, and we could talk about that. But yeah, so to answer your question a little bit about my story, I'm a pastor's kid, so we moved around a little bit. I'd say first half of my childhood was spent in North Dakota.
Okay.
I was born in Minnesota when my dad was in seminary, lived in North Dakota for 10 years. He served 2 churches. The first one, it's interesting now that I think about it. I'm thinking that every successive move I've made has been to a bigger location, more people. So we started out in Mayville, which is this little water tower town, railroad tracks, tiny.
In North Dakota.
Then we moved to Bismarck, and he served a church there for 6 years. And then we moved to Rhode Island and moved to a suburb of Providence called Cranston. It was enough culture shock to give me whiplash. This country bumpkin, like German farm town, North Dakotan with the accent, moves to 85% Italian Rhode Island, Cranston in particular. And suddenly I don't understand almost anything anyone's saying to me. And everyone's related. And no one looks like me, no one talks like me, and I'm just this weird kid from who knows where. And that's where I spent my middle school years and high school years.
Was in Rhode Island.
Was in Rhode Island. Yep.
Yep. And then you ended up in Massachusetts. I will say,
yep.
I've been to Rhode Island one time, and even going from Massachusetts to Rhode Island was a culture shock. Like Denver to Massachusetts was a culture shock. Massachusetts, the one day we spent in Rhode Island, I was like, where are we? Everybody was dressed like they were going to watch a polo match, or the Kentucky Derby. I was like, where
did you go? Did you go to Newport?
We were in Newport. We did the cliff walks over there and saw the gigantic mansions, and the mansion that was filmed in The Great Gatsby was there.
Yes,
it was awesome.
Yes, my wife grew up in Newport. She's a Navy brat, so she kind of grew up a lot of places, but her primary place was in Newport. My father-in-law was retired as a captain in the Navy. He taught at the Naval War College there. He taught strategy. Oh, wow. And my father-in-law is a whole nother topic. I would love to talk about him because he was literally Tom Cruise in Top Gun. That was his job in the Navy. He was a fighter pilot. Yeah. And that's crazy, awesome. Wonderful, amazing man. I'm so blessed that he was my father-in-law. So
Amen.
Anyway, so I know Newport. Newport's a little different than the rest of Rhode Island, though. I will say that. Yeah. Okay. The culture in Newport is its own. It's driven largely by the military population there, as well as the islanders, those who live there on the island, Aquidneck Island. They don't leave the island. They stay on the island. They've never been to Providence. They will never go to Providence. They don't. It's very interesting. Yeah. Why do we need to leave the island?
We're good. We're good. We like our spot.
Yeah.
So you go from Rhode Island. When did you move into Massachusetts, like the Framingham, Northborough area?
So I actually went to Massachusetts for my undergrad. I went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's where I got my bachelor's in electrical engineering. And then I met my wife. She went to University of Rhode Island, and we got married right after college. She graduated and I graduated both in May of 95. We were married by Thanksgiving of 95. And it's right around then that we moved up to Massachusetts because I was in high tech. And of course, you cannot escape the gravitational pull for high tech in Boston. So that's where
you can't. Yeah. And now you've lived in Colorado how long?
We ended up, we moved here in 2005. So I worked for a very small company in Hopkinton, Massachusetts called the EMC. Maybe you've heard of it.
I've seen it. Yep.
And now it's Dell EMC. And that was an amazing, amazing place to work. I really never thought I would leave. They paid for a master's degree for me at Brandeis University in Waltham. When I was nearing completion of that, Beth and I just felt like we were getting some desire to move. We weren't really sure why. The Boston winters are long. You might know that, and people
gray.
Hibernate. They're gray. So we started to explore where do we want to go, and humoring my wife who grew up on the East Coast. Everything Navy, East Coast, and so I said, well, okay, we can try and find some place family friendly to raise our kids. At that point, we had 4 kids, and I threw one lowly resume to Colorado, and I did. I mean, I knew the odds were good, and they bit hard, and they flew us out. They flew us out again, and full court press. And before long, we were sitting at our kitchen table. Our 7-year-old Eden, our oldest, is sitting there. And we're trying to make this decision. Do we stay or do we go? And if you unpack my Clifton strengths, my top 5, you'll understand there's no way I could ever rip my wife away from family and friends. I couldn't displace her ever unless she was 1,000,000% all in. And Eden's listening to Beth and I talk, and she goes, I feel like God's telling us we're supposed to move to Colorado.
Hold that thought. Okay.
Yeah.
You're feeling led to move?
Yeah. So I just looked at Eden like, is this out of the mouth of babes? and I looked at Beth, and she was like, it sounds like a great adventure. Inside, she's feeling like, no.
Yeah, because like if you're, at least my wife, she grew up up here.
Yes, like, mine too. Yeah.
the East Coast like holds you.
Oh yeah.
What is it about that the East Coast just like you can't leave?
It's family. I mean,
Uh-huh.
my wife's mom was one of 5 daughters, and those 5 daughters all went and had a lot of kids. So the number of my wife's cousins that are in Massachusetts between Boston, West Roxbury, um, Franklin, Milford, like a million cousins. And so it's like I just could never move her away from there.
Uh-huh.
But lo and behold, we're driving across the United States with
Uh-huh.
our stuff and moving to Colorado in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So we got here in
Wow.
June,
Okay.
May or June, and that was another story. God rolled out the red carpet once we finally made that decision in faith, and that was probably the very first learning moment, like real solid learning moment where we had a choice. We could make a decision in fear, or we could make a decision in faith.
Right.
And in that very dark time that we were presented with this opportunity to stay at EMC matched the offer I got here in Colorado. So like it was all things being equal.
Yeah.
Are you going to move or are you going to stay? And in the end, the decision, I firmly believe, did not come down to do we stay or do we go? The decision was simply, are you going to move in fear or are you going to move in faith? You can make either choice.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bless either choice if it's made in faith. But if you make it in fear, you kind of take a bunch of stuff off the table that could happen, right?
Right.
So we made that I mean, all things being equal, we were very afraid to move, and a fear-based decision would have had us stay there, because everything we know and love is here. Why would we leave it? And we made a faith-based decision, and we were like, we don't know anyone. We don't know anything. I just know there's mountains there, and man, that's in my soul. So
you're like, I get it. Yeah. Yeah.
you get it.
That'll give me something to think about later, because everything I know and love is in Colorado.
Yeah.
I was born there, raised there, never lived, except when I was in college. I never lived more than 15 minutes from my parents' house. And moving up, so this is the first time I've really moved away from home. And,
it's big.
So that's going to give me something to like process and think, because we've only been here 10 months now, I think. 10 months.
10 months.
Hasn't even been a year.
Yeah.
And it brings with it. I got to know though, which is better, Colorado or Massachusetts?
Oh my man. Oh gosh. It's hard to say either is better. I love Colorado. I will say that. I love Colorado. And at the same time, it took me 5 years to feel like Rhode Island was home, but it becomes home. And once it's home and you have the friends there, like it's wonderful. So we love going back to Rhode Island beaches. We love going back, seeing friends. They're dear friends in Massachusetts and Rhode Island that we love. And we get to spend actually a whole day with some of our friends here in a week. I think they're flying out here. They're going to hang out with us here.
All right.
But I mean, Colorado, there's just
the correct answer is Colorado. The correct answer is 100% Colorado.
I love Colorado.
If you stay out of Denver.
I love it.
If you stay out of Denver, it's the best. Like,
no doubt.
You get beautiful snow and then it melts.
Yeah.
It's always sunny. The mountains, since I grew up there, it was like, the mountains.
Yeah.
And now I have they're far away. I'm like, the mountains.
There's no humidity. There's few bugs.
No humidity.
Very few bugs.
I have 14 mosquito bites on my ankle right now from some mosquitoes. 14, we counted.
Oh, gosh.
Like, I'm never wearing shorts again.
No, yeah.
Never wearing shorts.
I love it here. My wife has said any number of times, I guess we're never leaving Colorado. That's up to God to decide. Yeah. I'll go where he leads.
Yeah. Amen. It's a hard place to leave.
It is.
And so you were working in high tech and you recently started out on this new venture.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The name of the company is People First Operations. That came from a woodworking session in front of my house where I was kind of journeying with the Lord in the recesses of your mind, and he's kind of reminding you of who you are and what you're good at and
Mm-hmm.
where your passions are. And I had been, at that point in time, I probably had been leading a software engineering team, building a new product for probably about 4 years, and loved it. I loved my people that worked for me. I loved working as a little bit out ahead and driving in very interesting work and enabling people to live into their strengths and their passions and set them up for success. And servant lead. Basically, I had leaders above me that let me lead the team the way I always felt was the right thing, and they weren't micromanaging me and telling me I was doing it wrong or anything. They were like, "We think you're set up to be a great leader, and we just want to support you in that." So I had that above me, and it was a beautiful thing. And I ended up I didn't know it, and I use this tagline. I'm not sure I'm the craziest about it for people first operations, but what I realized was over that course of a few years, uh, more engineers were coming to me and saying, "Do you have any positions open? When you do, come and talk to me because I want to join your team." And that happened more than once. And I started to think, wait, did I do that? Did I build a team that everybody wanted to join? And sure enough, it was like, when you lead with godly principles of kindness and love and faith, hope, and it produces wonderful fruit, and people see it and they want to be a part of it. So people first operations is about how do I bring what I learned to bear in the lives of other leaders and help them to lead in that way too. So it's coaching, it's consulting. I'm building some workshops, development workshops that I'll give in person, but at the same time thinking about doing some digital online course development of those things. So
yeah. So I've got a couple questions about leadership from you.
Sure.
Because leadership is very, very important. And I like your tagline. I like the tagline that you just said.
Cool.
It reminds me, there's a guy at the church up here who runs a leadership coaching business on the side called Leaders That Are Loved.
Okay.
And it's very effective. It's awesome. And
I'm gonna have to go look it up. Look him up.
Yeah, it reminded me of that, of what you just said. And so, one, I'll ask you just easy question: what's your favorite leadership book or 3 leadership books? Because I'm not much of a leadership book kind of guy. I've got a few that I liked, and the rest I was like, I love First and Second Samuel as leadership books.
Totally.
First and Samuel Daniel. Especially. And Daniel, did you say?
And Daniel. My goodness.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nehemiah.
Yep.
Liked Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership.
It's a very good one.
Those were, so you got the big books, the regular books. There's a book called Theodore Roosevelt on Leadership, which I really loved. And then that one, was that the one you're going to say?
No, but I know you and Theodore Roosevelt. And I will say last fall, my wife and I got to go out to Glenwood Springs, and we stayed at his hotel. So it's like a shrine to Teddy there. So that was awesome.
Well, the first chapter of that book is cease to be afraid. And I was like, I'm done.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So first would be like leadership resources. And then what would you say? I'm also curious about your top 5 Clifton strengths that you mentioned earlier. And then we'll start there, but then what's kind of your leadership style?
Sure. Yeah. So the books that I love, I have quite a long list. So I haven't published the list on my website yet. It's there. It's just not put out. But I would say, obviously, book number 1 is the Bible. That will always be book number 1. I'm going to take some liberty and take 3 other books besides the Bible. I would say for a long time, one of my absolute favorites was The Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner.
I've never heard of that.
In that book, they describe the 5 practices of an exemplary leader, which are model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. And I would say that for a long time, you read Jim Collins' Good to Great book, and he kind of gets to the end and he says, a lot of people ask me what makes a level 5 leader. and I can identify them, but I'm not really sure what makes them a level 5 leader. I think he has some better answers than that now. But I would say the more you do those 5 practices in a day, then someone else makes you more like a level 5 leader. Okay. So I love that book. Another book that I really love is Dr. Henry Cloud's Boundaries for Leaders. Phenomenal leadership book. And the third one, which I don't know if you've read it, David Marquette wrote a book called Turn This Ship Around. And he was a Navy submarine captain. And when I read that book and saw how he portrayed his leadership as a Navy sub captain coming onto a sub that was the worst performing boat in the fleet. And he turned that ship around, the name of the book, to becoming not just the best boat in the fleet, but like the best by a mile. I love that book. Plus it wraps in kind of historical nonfiction into the leadership points that he makes. So I really love that book. That notwithstanding, I could go on and on about Simon Sinek's Start With Why, Infinite Game, Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, Patrick Lencioni's The Ideal Team Player, and all of his stuff. So like there are deep waters out there, bro. And it's hard to name 3, but there's a lot that I love.
The ones that lead the heart. What's the name of that book? I want to write that down.
Turn the Ship Around, or
the first book,
the Leadership Challenge, the Leadership Challenge,
okay.
And the 5 practices.
Lead the heart, right? That was one of the 5 practices.
Encourage the heart is the last one. Is number 5. Yep. Model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. So those are some of my favorites.
Are you taking those 5, or what's your leadership style?
So my leadership style definitely is a mashup of all of those things.
Okay.
There's no question that we as leaders, people want results, right? I mean, people look to leaders to get results. And there's this, my favorite leadership things are those things that are counterintuitive, where as we come into the situation, we go, should I go right or left? Okay, well, I need to get stuff done. I need to make it happen. That's kind of like your first mistake. You need to make it happen. Who's really making it happen is your people, most likely.
Right. Yeah.
So there's this, like, you're starting off with kind of a false premise that you need to make it happen. And in reality, we wake up every day and we join God in his work. God's already been at work all night long. We wake up and he's like, hey, you want to come and join me? Right? So God's going to make it happen. We get to participate in that in ways that resemble the way he shows up to us. And so we fret and we worry and we hold on to control and we try and make it happen. And he's just sitting there going, what are you doing? Like, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Like, do you want to live into that? Do you want to, like, not be afraid and trust me that I'm going to order your steps, even though they're clumsy and kind of all over the map? So number 1, leadership, North Star. I in People First Operations, I talk about a North Star for leadership, is that we start with an eternal perspective. And that's very counterintuitive, right? But if you jump into 1 Corinthians 3 and you see Paul, he's talking about building on a foundation that he laid, which is Christ. And whatever we build on that foundation has to withstand the fire of God's judgment. And so we have to build with eternal materials. And you come into that and you go, well, how is my work building on this foundation going to last into eternity? Because what he says later in 1 Corinthians 3 is those who build things that withstand that fire, they'll receive a reward. And those that don't, they'll make it, like they'll
just watch everything burn up, though.
But it's going to be not as rewarding. So I sit here and go, okay, with an eternal perspective, I come into every situation, whether it's leading my home and my family, or it's leading at work or it's leading at church. And I go, okay, with an eternal perspective, I will do what? And just that perspective often will make me go right and not left. But if I come into it with my finite thinking, and this is one of the reasons I really love Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, because he's saying, come at it with an infinite perspective, with an eternal perspective, because it really does change the dynamics of whatever the decision is in the moment. So I would say leadership philosophy starts with that, and then it goes into how can I show up with faith, hope, and love every day and love the people that I get to and am honored to lead. And leaders eat last, and all these types of things. And it's like, yeah, I want to give of everything that I have in service to others, but at the same time, I want to do it in an infinitely sustainable way. So how do I lean into what the Lord has for me in this and reap benefits of joy and experience his blessing in the midst of that? So there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, so because I'll ask you a question about if you've ever worked for a bad leader.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I don't really care for leadership books is some of them seem to fall flat. And so I like to draw leadership principles from biographies of great men who were great leaders and see, like, what did you do? Right. And almost all of them had a deep care for their men or whoever they were leading.
Yeah.
They also were someone you could imitate.
Yeah.
But it was that deep care for the men. They had a lot of wisdom. There was another book my dad had us read. It was called Lincoln on Leadership. It was about Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, yeah.
That was fantastic also. But all these other ones, I'm like, well, I don't see these resources. But the way you're talking, I feel like I came into this podcast fully expecting to be the host that learns, because I'm like, here's a guy with a lot of wisdom, 4 kids. I can't wait till we talk about the kids. But even you said people were coming to you so you could be their leader. And I'm like, I don't know anything about engineering, but you could hire me if you want. I know you're not in high tech anymore, but you can hire me if you want. I'll learn how to do something.
I love it.
And it's just by the way you're talking. You've got a smile on your face. You haven't broken eye contact. You're very clear. I'm like, wow, Mark's the man. Mark's the man.
No. I want first and foremost you to know that anything that I have to offer you is from the Lord, and he gets the glory and honor. And I'm just grateful to him for what I get to do every day. So I don't want this to be about me.
Have you ever worked for a bad leader?
Yeah.
What were they like? Without being, degrading. What were they like? What made them hard to follow?
Yeah, well, maybe not the first, but the most, the leader that was driven the most by fear showed up the worst. And it happened a very, very long time ago. I doubt that anyone is going to be able to tell who I'm talking about, thankfully. So I'll keep this very, very anonymous. But I was working on a small software engineering team. We were building a very small product. And this manager every day would have a angry, rage-filled tirade directed at almost every day, directed at one of the people in the group. And there were only 3 or 4, there were 4 of us on this small team. And we were working on something that was brand new for the company. It was a new software product. And I didn't have the wherewithal to really pull him aside and say, I need to understand, what are you so afraid of? You kind of get the fog of war and things are just like, very much in your face, but I wish I could now. But he was definitely afraid of failure. And he picked this one gentleman who seemed like perhaps to him was the least performer, and would excoriate him routinely. And eventually, you could probably tell me what happened. He quit. He's like, I don't need this. And found another job, and he left. So then this manager was like, who am I going to kick now? And so he picked someone else and started to lean into this person, and they left. And then it got to me. And one day he came into my office and he just started yelling. And it was just like, I had been loaned to him by my manager, the actual manager that I worked for. And so my manager came in after that tirade and he looked at me and he goes, never let him do that to you again. And I'm like, I'm in my office here. He came in, like, what am I supposed to do? But so it was just sort of like one of those things that gets burned into your brain and you're like, wow, I'd never want to do that. Like, what are the emotions? What are the beliefs and the motivations that would lead someone to get to that point where in an office environment they would just totally blow up? And so, introspection, reflection, my faith and the Lord's Holy Spirit just sort of saying, okay, this is how you not get there. I've worked for other leaders that, and this is the thing, there's no perfect leader, right? I am so far from being perfect. And so I'm sure that some of the folks that have reported to me could go, we could tell you some stories about Mark. And it may be true. I know they'd be true. But that's where, like, we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses and our blind spots, and we all have our besetting sins, truthfully. And so how do we bring all of who we are to the Lord and consecrate ourselves to the Lord? I'm going through John Eldridge's 30 Days to Resilient right now. And so there's a consecration of my mind, there's a consecration of my emotions, and all of who I am, I bring to him and I consecrate them to him and let him work and change me in a way that helps me show up more like him to the people in the office or the people at my home. And there was one day I was driving home from work and I had been listening to the Leadership Challenge on Audible. It's a great read on Audible. And I remember where I was and the stop sign I was coming to and the 2x4 of the Holy Spirit that hit me in the back of the head in that moment, where he spoke to me and said, this is all well and good, Mark. All this leadership stuff that you're listening to is great, but are you doing it at home? Are you modeling the way at home? Are you inspiring a shared vision at home? Are you challenging the process at home and enabling others to act and encouraging the heart? And really, it was the two, number 1 and number 5. Are you modeling it at home and are you encouraging their heart enough at home? And I was like, oh, ouch.
I feel like I've had a couple of those lately. Which I want to talk to. I have a lot of questions about raising children, marriage, because you've been married since, you said,
1995.
95. Okay, so you're coming up.
We're 27. We're 27 and a half, going to 28. So
okay,
thank the Lord.
So I'll ask you some questions about that. But we do have a lot of young guys that listen to this podcast. So I've got 2 questions.
Love those.
One would be, what advice would you give to somebody who is under poor leadership? But before you answer that one, you said poor leadership typically shows up in the form of fear. How well, and this guy in this particular case, he's berating you. How else does that manifest? Because I have a theory. I don't know if it's correct or not, but a lot of times what I'm seeing, if someone thinks they're a good leader, maybe they aren't. There's almost a sense of grandeur about their importance, a sense of self-importance. Leaders are important, but there's this weird sense of self-importance. But there's also this, it's not really controlling, but maybe a little bit controlling. But it's these two in conjunction. Like, I'm very important. Everything needs to be done my way, this way, or look what gift I have to offer you. It's something like that. But so how does poor leadership manifest if it's done through fear, other than hopefully not berating people? And then if a young man, early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, is sitting there like, I think I'm under a bad leader and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Oh gosh.
Big question.
That is a big question. I think what I heard you talking about is definitely something that challenges anyone who rises in status, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in the office or what have you, we do
Mm-hmm.
we can become prideful. We
Mm-hmm.
can, get a big head and think that
Yeah.
our words have more weight and merit than they ought. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the remarkable thing for me, whenever I've seen wonderful leaders, is the ones that have a crazy amount of status
Mm-hmm.
or recognition
Mm-hmm.
or worldly success, and
Mm-hmm.
they're so humble. And when
Yeah.
you meet them, they're like, "Oh my goodness, Keaton, it is an honor to meet you,
Mm-hmm.
and tell me about yourself. I just
Yeah.
want to know about you." And you're sitting there going, "Wait, who am I that
Yeah.
you are, who are well known by so many, would be
Yeah.
asking about me?" But
Yeah.
like that's a beautiful thing, because isn't that what Jesus does for us
Mm-hmm.
here? He's
Mm-hmm.
like, "No, I want to know you.
Mm-hmm.
You're fearfully and wonderfully made. I
Mm-hmm.
love you, and you matter most to me. You're my favorite." Right? We're all his favorite, but
Yeah.
Peyton, you're his favorite.
Yeah.
Um, so that's stark contrast to a prideful, non-listening, uh, fear-driven or ego-driven or
Mm-hmm.
what have you, leader. Now, what to do about that when you
Mm-hmm.
work for someone like that? I think the number one, we are all leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person is a leader, and
Mm-hmm.
some people just don't know it yet or aren't
Mm-hmm.
willing to accept that they are. But someone is always watching you, someone is
Mm-hmm.
always listening to you, and you're showing up. However you show up influences someone towards
Mm-hmm.
what something. So what are you
Yeah.
leading towards is the
Yeah.
question that I ask.
Yeah.
In that moment when I was under that angry leader, I was showing up in a passive way. And so I was leading poorly
Uh-huh.
in that moment. Even though
Uh-huh.
I wasn't the manager, I
Right.
still wasn't leading well. I should have
Right.
stopped him and said, "Whoa, time out. What
Right.
what's happening here? What do you think is happening here?" And
Mm-hmm.
not have been passive. But
Yeah.
I was passive,
Yeah.
and shame on me for being passive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for someone who's under poor leadership, um, don't mistake uh, the fact that you are a leader in that moment and that you can
Mm-hmm.
show up in a way that is godly, and you can put a halt to some bad behavior by asking the question, what's happening here? I'm going to give you my
Yeah.
perspective on what I see, and let's drive towards a healthier culture. Let's drive towards a healthier behavior. And because I think that you want this team to succeed, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that you want us to accomplish our goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you're bringing to the table is actually working against us accomplishing these goals,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they are. And
Yeah.
that's what I find is, a people first operational culture um, can allow for that healthy dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
resolving things that aren't great, but with the effort of making it better so that we can go further, faster, with less energy,
Yeah.
conserving momentum,
Yeah.
yielding results for whatever we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I
So
think that's something I would say to somebody who's in maybe a bad leadership position.
yeah,
It's risky for
it
sure.
is.
It's
Yeah, it's
risky.
risky, but I love that your first response wasn't, you just quit. That is a common thing. It's like, my leader's not living up to my leader's not either. My leader's not good, or they not beating the what I think a leadership should be. I've been here 6 months, but
Right.
because there are some times where we young folk think somebody is a bad leader just because we haven't. My daughter's here.
Oh, I love it.
Come say hi. Say
Hi.
hi. This is
Hi.
Mark.
Hi, beautiful.
Say hi, Noah.
What you got in the cup? What's in the cup?
Bunnies. Are these bunnies?
Oh, that's the
You have
best.
bunnies. All right, you have to go
Hi.
with Mama. Go see Mama. I love you.
Oh, Noah's beautiful, bro.
And she's obsessed with Dad right now.
Oh, it's the best.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm.
I was listening to you yesterday, and you said something on the podcast I was listening to that I had never heard before. And as soon as you said it, and then the context in which you said it, I was like, oh yes. I was driving down the hill from here to my house, and you talked about cute aggression. Was that the?
Yes.
I was like, yes, that's a thing. I've never heard that term before, but I get it.
I think it's either like an old millennial or a young millennial and a Gen Z thing. Cute aggression. You're just like, oh, I just could eat you.
I love it.
So going back to the leadership thing, with young guys, sometimes you're under bad leadership and you're like, you have all the solutions, so you're just puffed up with pride, and other times it's like, no, this is actually a really bad leader, I should quit, probably. But the first response probably should not be, I'm just going to quit, they're a bad leader, right? What you said is, why don't you be a leader and engage with your superior in a respectful way? Don't go with all the solutions to their life. Just go and ask some respectful questions, because this is the person in authority over you.
For sure.
I love that. It was like, to a world where it's easy to get a new job.
Yeah.
Just every couple of years.
Yeah.
Engage. Okay. I like that a lot. That's good. Because I feel like most leaders are probably not terrible, like horrible, horrendous, yelling, berating you.
Yeah.
A lot of them may not be very good. But if a challenge arises and you choose to just quit, that'll carry over to other areas of your life. When a challenge arises, you'll probably just quit. So I'm thinking, like, I imagine frequently what it's going to be like when my daughter no longer wants to bust into the office and talk to me, but she wants to slam the door.
It's not going to happen.
No, like, I don't get to quit,
Nope.
Like, you can't just be like, oh, I'm out of here.
Right.
And that's something I think about frequently. Is there anything else you would add on leadership other than that? And because I got a lot of questions about family stuff.
Well, I'm happy to go there too. I can talk, Keaton. This is a passion project of mine, and I can talk all day about leadership, but I think it segues perfectly into the home, because honestly, so much of how I show up at work is how I show up at home, right? We talk about integration and disintegration. We don't want to have one persona that daddy is at work or mom is at work and have a different mask that we put on at home. We want to be a full integrated person. And there were many times where I was leading engineers and teams, and I thought, man, this is so much like parenting. Not in a derogatory way, like not in a way to say those that reported me were acting like children. That's not it. It was just like, man, I'm using the same muscles that I use at home. The conflict's a little different, but really the same muscles. So like, let's strengthen those muscles and get stronger as leaders in the home and at work.
I can see the parallels. Kids don't understand why you tell them what to do. Like your employees or your people underneath may not understand why, and the proper response or the improper response is just because I said so. Like,
that just doesn't work.
No, you can't say that for your kids. You can't say that for your employees.
I mean, you can. You can try that, and it might yield some results for a while, but it's a finite. You're leading towards with finite decision making in that when you do that. So,
for real. So you have 4 children, correct?
I have 5 actually.
Oh, you have 5. You have 5 kids.
I have 5.
What's the age gap between the oldest and the youngest?
So Eden is 20. Oh gosh, she was born in 97, December 97. So was she 25? Going to be 26. And my youngest is going to be 17 in 5 days. So it's about 10 years span.
Yeah. Okay, so every 2 years. My wife has not said she wants 5. I've been pushing for 5. I would love 5 kids.
I can just say it's a beautiful thing.
So no one's crazy for wanting 5 kids, because it's like in my generation, young millennials, either like very tail end of millennials or early Gen Z, is like, you got to be crazy to want to have more than 2 kids. Don't you want to like make a lot of money, have a lot of fun, and all this other stuff? And I'm like, well, no, I want to have a lot of kids. And everybody I know who has a lot of kids, they're not poor.
It's
there's
so
actually there's plenty of promises about God taking care of your children, and God gives you the power to get wealth anyway. That's in Deuteronomy.
Yep.
What was it like raising your 5 children? Because let me intro and tell you hopefully what I'm looking for. I've got 2 kids. I've got a girl. My little daughter is about to turn 2. I have a son who's about 3 months. I'm hoping for more. We've been married 3 years, and my daughter doesn't listen to every little word I say. She's very jealous of my of our 3-month-old. At this current moment, when Dad holds him, not when Mom holds, only when Dad holds. And I don't know if I have made a right decision in probably 6 or 7 months. Like I maybe 2 years. I haven't made a right decision. Actually, I had just written something earlier this week on my Substack about Moses and him leading the people of Israel to the Red Sea. And I was like, what did I say? It was like, I've got the Red Sea in front of me, an army behind me, and army behind me, sea in front of me, and everybody's mad at me, or something like that. And I was like, that's kind of what that feels like sometimes.
For sure.
Now, not that we don't fight very often or anything. We actually have a beautiful, beautiful marriage. But what I'm feeling like as a father and as a husband, I'm like, I've never felt this kind of pressure before to lead. And there's a part of me that keeps hoping my wife will be the initiator of things that I think our family should do. And I know, I know that's my job. But part of me is like, man, maybe if she initiates, I can like come in and take over. Or if I do initiate, I was like, I can't tell if you like what I'm doing. Initiating being like, I want to pray with our family in the morning. I want to, like right now we're doing a Bible study with my kids in their little picture Bible every morning in bed, and Noah's jumping around. My wife's like hardly awake. Like,
totally.
So there's kind of my background.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I love it.
How do you lead this family? I have never prayed as much as I've prayed in the last 3 months.
That's great. That's perfect. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do.
That's good. I'm glad. I feel the effects of grace when I'm praying, and at the same time I'm all like, I gotta go pray again, because I'm like, and I want more, and but part of the pressure is I want to be a good father. I want my kids to speak about me the way I talk about my father. And my mother, like my parents are the best people I've ever met, hands down. It's not even close.
I love it.
I told my dad the other day, I was like, when I ask for advice, I need you to give it. Like, don't tell me you're protecting me. I need your advice. I hope, and that has everything to do with how they raised us. They were very present in our life, very engaged. They held their standard really, really well. I pushed hard, but they held their standards. And so there's like, I want to be the best father I possibly can be, the best husband I can be. It brings a lot of pressure. Mark, in your humility, through God's grace, tell me everything you know immediately, right now.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I was just sitting here like all the million things are coming to mind. I think, are you a golfer? Do you like golf?
I don't. I like Top Golf.
Yeah.
But I don't really care for golf. It's a little too slow for me.
Yeah. I only bring it up because when you get to the point where you're wanting to hit the ball, you can have 100 things go through your head, and none of them are helpful because it's this massive jumble all at the same time. And then it's like, you just shank it. So really what happens is, I have 2 or 3 things when I am addressing the golf ball that I think they're my swing thoughts. It's like, do this, and do this. And then let muscle memory take over.
Yeah.
And I hope you're okay with sports analogies, but
I love sports analogies. And that one makes sense to me.
So this is a you're going to get a lot of reps. You already are. If she's turning 2, you've gotten a lot of reps. You're getting more reps, and there's an aspect of parenting and being the leader in your home that's just about what you said. It's like you got to have grace. You have to have grace for yourself. You have only been doing this for 2 years, and that's, I mean, if we think about when we hire someone to a job who's got 2 years of experience, they're kind of on the junior side, right? Like that just is what it is. So have grace. I also heard what you said in another podcast where it's like, get close to older men and listen to them. And so that's great. That's a good thing. But here's the thing. When I think swing thoughts for parenting, pray like crazy, and not just by yourself, but with your kids. Bathe them, cover them in prayer. And they're not always going to be trekking with you. They're not always going to be sitting still. They're not always going to be like, folding their hands, looking like a normal Norman Rockwell painting. That's not parenting, right? And so it doesn't matter. You're faithfully leading in those moments where you're like, we would pray on our bed, and I'm sitting in our bedroom, so I'm looking at my bed. We would pray with all the kids piled on our bed before they went to bed every night. Wow. And it was that was the cadence. It's like, all right, guys, it's time for bed. Come on in, we're going to pray. And we would all pray. It was like popcorn style. Everybody would go around, and even our 2-year-old would be like, whispering to mom, can you help me? Can you help me? I don't know what to say. And so Beth would be, or I would be like, dear Jesus, please, thank you for this day. Thank you for this day. Right. And so it's just this. And what's really cool is we talked a little bit about this maybe before we hit record, but Jim Wilder talks about how our brains work. And there's these neurons called imitator neurons, and they are only trained through imitation. So when you're sitting there going, dear Jesus, and they're saying, dear Jesus, you're training their imitator neurons, which are a significant part of their brain. It's those neurons that the phrase caught, not taught comes from. Because we see that. We see, well, that was caught. I didn't teach them that, but they sure know what they're doing. And so, we talked about this as you and I were setting up the podcast, but God's design for discipleship is in the home. And it's all about how you go about day in and day out, moment by moment with your kids, and just bring them into your life of faith and your life of work and your life of relationship with your wife and with your friends. And, there's a culture that we create in our home, and the kids help contribute to that culture. This is where, the leadership challenge, inspiring a shared vision. As a leader, we get to come into our home and we get to share a vision for what our home life would be like, but then we get to share that vision and the creation. It's a co-creation of that vision. And sometimes the kids are like, well, I don't want to pray at night. And you're like, well, I'm sorry, that's non-negotiable. And I'm the leader. We're going to pray at night because that's what Tuckers do, or that's what Paulsons do. And in that, you're then hooking into the other part of Jim Wilder's learnings, which is we need to have a strong group identity. And what is the group identity of this family unit? Do we show up? Are we present? Do we put in our earbuds when everybody's at the dinner table and have our cell phones? Or do we say, no, those don't belong here. We're going to participate in each other's lives because this relationship is the most important thing. So how you create that culture, and with the eternal perspective coming into, with an eternal perspective, what's the kind of culture that I want my family to have, whether we're at home or we're out at church or we're out at a restaurant. And how can I, as a dad and a mom, be creative about how we encourage and create that culture of fun and joy? And we're going to smile a lot at each other, right? The four ingredients to spiritual transformation per The Other Half of Church, the book that Jim and Michael Hendricks wrote,
Right.
is high joy, high hesed, which is that covenantal attachment love. There's nothing, Noah, that you could ever do that would make your daddy Tucker not love you. There is a covenantal attachment love to that. And then a strong group identity, which is we show up. We're relational with each other when we're around each other. If my kid comes around me, the earbuds come out. That's just like, I don't care what I'm doing, the earbuds come out. You have access, full access to me. And I'm not like heads down in ignoring you. And then there's number 4, which is healthy correction, right? And when I read that book, The Other Half of Church, and I read those 4 things and really dove in, I was like, oh my goodness, this is why church discipline that Paul talks about worked, because there was high joy, there was high hesed in that church community, there was a strong group identity. And with those 3 things, when healthy correction had to come to bear, people could not imagine being cast out of that community. It's like, no, I will change. I totally will change. And that's what we're doing in our home is we're creating that type of culture. So,
okay. I had about 100 questions run through my mind all at once. So I'm going to say some that we don't have to answer right now, but I don't want to forget. One was creating the culture in the home in conjunction with your wife. I have a question about that.
Sure.
For those listening, The Other Half of Church by Jim Wilder is the book that he was just referencing, and you've applied it to your home. The basic premise of that book, he's a neuroscientist, theologian almost. And in this book, he explains how half of your brain, I believe it's the left half of your brain, runs on joy. Nothing but joy. People smiling at you. That's why the number 6 blessing is so important. May the Lord smile upon you. And then, okay, so the culture in the home with your wife. I wanted to ask about that. And then I'm assuming all of those points that you had just said came from The Other Half of Church, or did it also come from the other book that Jim Wilder wrote that you were telling about, Renovated?
No.
Okay. All The Other Half of Church?
Yeah, most of that was. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, a little tickle.
Hey, I understand. The creating a family culture with your wife, because that's something I really want to do. And, it's kind of awkward at first. Sometimes it feels like, oh, because this is how I was raised, or this is how I was raised. What are we going to do together? What's really important? What's not? Those kinds of things.
Right.
There's even been times where it's like, oh, this feels kind of tense because we're just trying to figure out, are we going to raise our kids? How are we going to raise our kids? So like for me, I don't want my kids to be in daycare most of their life. Like I just don't. That's something I don't want. And so we were trying to figure out, do we send our daughter to more daycare? Or do we keep them at home? If we keep them at home, that means, well, Chelsea's a stay-at-home mom. And then, so there's like other things like that. And then the pressure's on for me. It's like, well, then you better provide. Like there are, there's some of that. When you guys set out to create your culture for your home, what did you and your wife do together to establish that? Where was there tension? How did you get through the tension?
Yeah.
How did you guys do it?
I think that I'm going to answer your question in a slightly roundabout way.
Okay.
And it kind of comes back to the point that you made in another podcast, which is bring older, wiser people around you. And so what Beth and I did when we started having kids was we really started paying attention. Who are the families that are out ahead of us that have families and kids that we love and that we're like, oh, it would be wonderful if our kids were like their kids. And it would be wonderful and we would look at the relationships between mom and dad and the kids, if our relationships with our kids looked like that. So you start with kind of the end in mind as you come into these conversations with your wife, and you bring in great counsel. And so we had some amazing counsel from some amazing people who were incredible parents, raising families that we saw and we thought, man, we want to look just like them, the Priskeneses or the Hollows or the, and I could just go on with the names. And then it was a matter of going and spending time with them. What do you do? Like, what did you do? So for us, when we started having kids, we were thinking we want to look like that. And the relationships clearly matter the most. So when we're developing this culture in our home, we want to make sure it's highly relational. I didn't know anything about Jim Wilder's book then that I know now. And now I go, oh, thank you, Lord, for leading us in this way, because we had high joy. We smiled at each other a lot. We laughed a lot together. We had a Hesed love, that covenantal attachment love. The kids knew we were 100% sold out for them no matter what. And we had a strong group identity that was around Jesus. We go to church on Sunday mornings because we want to go worship Jesus. We go and we do our work with excellence because we want it to worship Jesus, and really leading intentionally towards those three things. And then healthy correction comes in, which, as a parent, it starts young. And it's hard. And you're like, did I make a good choice just then? Like, it was, man, she didn't obey me. I remember the very first time I was alone with my oldest. We were in one of our first apartments, and we had this television. Now, the televisions back then were not like the televisions we have today. It was heavy, and it was on a television cart that was wobbly on carpet, so it was even wobblier. It was a safety nightmare, right? But Eden crawled over to this television, and I looked at Eden and I said, no, don't touch it, no. And she looked at the TV, and she looked at me, and then she looked at the TV, and she went, boop. She touched it. She's like, what are you gonna do? Like, complete, like, pushing the boundaries. And I'm like, wait, you're too young to be willfully disobeying me when I just told you no, and I know you know what no means. And you're like, what do you do in that moment? It's like, well, there's a healthy correction. There's a lot of love. It's not an anger thing. It's like,
did you laugh?
No, I did not laugh.
Okay. There have been times when Noah she has been defiant, and I can't help but laugh.
Totally.
And I'm
like, I get it.
And then she thinks it's so funny, and she does it again. I'm like,
right. No, I just rewarded that. Yeah, totally. No, I didn't laugh. There was a weight. It was like, what do I do in this moment? I'm a thinker. I just was like busy thinking. So I, through some of the parenting training that we had, it was like, you have to be very careful with corporal punishment, but I wanted it to smart a little bit. So I carefully held her hand and her wrist, and I gave her a tap on the back of the hand, and she cried, and I just hugged her, and I said, it's okay, it's okay. But, it starts, my parents always told me, and this is, again, those older couple coming in and being like, this is what you have to do. You do the hard work from the ages of, I guess Eden at that point was probably 9 months old. 9 months to 5 years old, right? And it's the analogy would be that elephant on a string, right? The baby elephant on a string learns they can't break it, but then they grow up into this huge elephant, and that string's not going to do anything, but they don't try, right? So do the hard work of teaching your kids to obey between 0 and 5, because after 5 years old, it gets way easier. It does. I'm just going to tell you, it's not a lot of, well, that part of parenting gets a lot easier. Okay. So spanks, whatever, done in love, not in never in anger, never in anything resembling.
Quote. Parents should not spank their kids in anger.
I 1,000,000% agree. I will say it over and over and over again. And my kids knew if they got a spanking, Dad was sitting there rubbing their butt right after, trying to make it stop stinging, and like, no, I love you, it's okay, I forgive you, let's pray, right? So in that moment, Beth and I would just be like, let's pray, let's ask Jesus to forgive us, because really your sin was not against me, it was against him, and I want to heal that relationship with you, between you and him, because that's what is really affected. So leading well in that, and and really it came from a lot of training from parents that went before us that were like, this is what we do. This is why we do what we do. This is the end in mind. It's the goal is to teach them to obey. The goal is that they would be cheerful in their obedience. And then once you're at that point where it's like not all about me, then we get to have fun blessing other people and bringing the joy of giving into the equation, so that they experience acts of service done willfully and joyfully, and suddenly it's turning back around and they're more blessed than the person that they blessed. And to see that, so it's you're just getting reps. It's just reps.
So we do have a rule when it comes to spanking Noah. There's only certain things she gets spanked for. She doesn't get spanked just cause. And we have a rule. She doesn't get a spanking until we've explained why she's getting a spanking.
Oh yeah.
So, because one, it slows us down, so we're not reacting.
Right.
And there's times we wanted to react.
Totally.
But it also helps her understand, like, okay, I'm not being arbitrarily physically disciplined. Right. There's a reason.
Yep.
And so we have, like, she's actually at the age now, she can explain in little words, like, do you know why you're getting spanked? So like last night she got spanked, and it had been a while, and like, do you know why you're getting spanked? She goes, I throw spoon. She had thrown her spoon at mom. And I was like, don't laugh. It was so cute. You said something, it reminded me of a conversation I was having with my brother. And so just for some context, this is the home office. There's a door right this way. And when I work here, my daughter usually doesn't know, but there's some stairs right there. And sometimes she comes up the stairs, and if she sees the door closed, she knows I'm in here. And so the other day I'm working up from home, and she finds out I'm home, and goes, Daddy, and runs to the door.
Yeah.
Opens the door and comes and spends some time with me while I'm in the middle of work. Had a lot to do. So I write about this on my Substack, because on Substack I have a section called The Dad I Want to Be. And so I write, because I'm like, I have no idea, but I know who I want to be, and we'll see how I get there and things I've learned along the way. And so I tell this story, and then my conclusion is, I always want to be a dad who's available when his kids call to him. Like, I just want the door was locked at the time, and that was devastating to her. So I had to unlock it and be like, Dad's here, come on in, and my brother texted me. He's like, hey, I read your Substack. And he said, Jordan Peterson would say, Jordan Peterson, the infamous Jordan Peterson, would say, you need to teach your kids not to interrupt you while you're working. And I was like, okay, well, she's 2. He did, which my brother did say. He's like, I don't know if he means 2-year-olds, but
right.
I was like, okay, there is an element where, dads, you can't just play with your kids all day especially if you're the provider. You also have a responsibility to provide, but also to do your duty for the people who are paying you or whatever. Yep. So you can't just play with your kids all day, but at the same time, I want to be available to my little girl when she's like, Daddy.
Totally.
So I was like, I was thinking about that, and it's like, should I teach my kids that we don't interrupt Dad while he's working, or should I teach my kids that the door is always open, or is there a third option that doesn't have to be those two?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think, again, we come into it and think about, with an eternal perspective, how do we decide a thing like this? And so, obviously we're not an infinite God who has an infinite amount of capacity and attention. And, we would have a door always open with our Heavenly Father, and he would be like, yep, come on in. Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we do, as dads, carry that weight in our home. our kids' experience of the Father is going to be very much like their experience of life with you and me. And so there's a weight of responsibility there. Like, how do I show up to my 2-year-old who doesn't understand necessarily?
Right.
And there were times where I would work at home when my kids were little, and I can remember thinking, oh, I got the demands of work. I got to get this thing done. And they're misbehaving. They're totally like trashing the joint and like throwing stuff, and they're fighting. And honestly, like, and I don't know why the Lord brought these things to memory as I was thinking about being on your podcast, but there were moments where I just remember thinking, it's not their fault, it's your fault. Go and be with them. What they need right now is you to play a game with them and give them some structure to this otherwise unstructured Lord of the Flies like chaos that's ensuing in the living room. So close your laptop, it'll be okay. Take some time and go spend time with them. They're going to go down for a nap at some point, and then you can focus on your thing. So there is this tension that we live in, and it's like, yeah, we have to balance the things that we need to get done with the ones that are the most important things in our lives, which are our kids. And when I think about on my deathbed someday, what are the regrets that I have? The regrets will never, ever, ever revolve around, I wish I had that laptop open more. I wish I spent more time editing that document or writing that piece of code. The regrets will always be, I just wish I had closed the darn laptop and spent a little more time with them. Everything was going to be okay with work, and I know it, and I might have missed a deadline, or I might have had to stay up till midnight instead of 11:30 to finish that thing. And so, start with the end in mind, have an eternal perspective as you come into the decisions. I'm a verbal processor, so I came up with this answer as I talked with you about it. And it's like, oh, right. Yeah, this is where we want to get to. We bring the image of God. We're image bearers to our kids. So what is the image that we want them to have of God? And how do I show up like that? So anyway.
Okay, that's very helpful. I am also an external processor.
Yeah.
And when I start processing externally, I have to tell my wife ahead of time.
Right. Warning.
Warning, I'm about to start processing. I'm not making a decision.
Exactly. Yes.
We're just talking. We're just talking.
That's right.
But what you had said, it reminded me of something my father used to do that I only appreciated as an adult and didn't really understand as a kid. Dad was, as far as I can remember, Dad was always at breakfast. He was always at dinner. I don't remember not having dinner with Dad. There was one time for a 3-month period, he was working in Grand Lake, Colorado. And so he would stay up at the cabin he was working at. That's the only time I remember him not being home for dinner. But I do remember he'd come home, because he was baseball coach, Boy Scout master, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He'd come home, have dinner. He'd go to baseball practice, or he'd do the Boy Scout thing. I do remember, though, him putting us to bed and then going back to work because he had stuff that he had to get done. And it was like, okay, it was almost as if I can sacrifice sleep, my family, or my job. Well, I can't sacrifice my family. I can't sacrifice my job because then we won't have a home.
Right.
So I guess I'll sacrifice my sleep. And to me, it's like, in our modern world with everybody's seeking after comfort, I have to have comfort. Everything has to be like perfectly aligned for me. Otherwise my mental health can't handle it.
Yeah. Yep.
It was like almost as if we're trying to avoid a form of taking up our cross. And I heard someone say recently, everybody hopes they can avoid picking up their cross, but you're either going to pick it up in your family or in somewhere else. I think it was actually a Catholic priest who had said it. He's like, people think they can go become in the religious life and not pick up their cross, or go into family life and pick up your cross. And like, God's going to make you pick it up anyway.
It's true.
You have to find a way to die to yourself. And as I'm verbally processing right now, I think that's what my pops was doing for us. That was very, very helpful. Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah, I want her to be able to come in and
Yes.
be available.
Yes. Yeah.
When it came to providing, the world feels very expensive right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just uber expensive. Everything is oof.
Oof.
How did you? I know that there may have been. Well, I don't know. I'm sure there were times where it felt like, hey, money's a little tight. Other times it felt like, oh, we have an abundance.
Yeah.
Navigating that pressure, knowing the Lord will provide. We're going to pray.
Hmm.
What was your mindset and approach for the sake of your family? Did you ever feel like, hey, I got to go get a second job, or I'm just going to need to start a new endeavor, or when money was tight, or if it ever was?
Yep.
What was your mindset as a man?
So there were a few times in our marriage and raising kids where I looked at Beth and I said, I need to figure out how to make more money.
Mm-hmm.
This equation's not balancing, right?
I've said that to my wife, I think 10 times in the last year.
Yeah. So that's a real thing. I will tell you right now, Keaton, that it's interesting you asked me this question right now, because I am living in faith more than I ever have as it relates to the income stream. And I think that's where we grow the most in our faith, because, we know we have Jehovah Jireh. He is our provider. And do we trust in that? Or do we trust in the corporation that has the almighty dollar that supports our well-being and our health and our benefits and the food and all the things?
Yeah.
Undergirding that, we always know God is providing that, right? I always know. But when that layoff comes and we sit and go, okay, now what? And, up until this past February, now what always to me looked like, well, I polish the resume and I start seeding the system with resumes, and something will pop in alignment with God's timing, and we're going to be okay. And this time the Lord did not let me do that. And it was like, oh, but God, I have 2 in college. and we have like, I will warn you, as the kids get older, they don't get cheaper. they don't.
Told. Chelsea keeps talking to me about all the sports kids are going to be doing. I'm like, they're going to be delivering newspapers, not playing sports.
Oh my goodness. Well, and then wait till the permit comes, and then you're entertaining how do they get around in some vehicle, and you're paying for car insurance and the vehicle, and it's just like, oh my goodness, it snowballs. So in that, and all the while we're sitting there going, how much are we saving for college? None. We're not saving anything for college because it's all we can do to pay for what we need to pay for. So, but to move forward with that, again, I keep coming back to that eternal perspective and knowing that God will provide. And I will say that I have made a strong growth edge for myself to not worry about money. Now, have I? Yes, 1,000,000%. And I will also tell you that in those moments when I let my guard down and I worried about money, I showed up bad for Beth and for the kids. It does not yield the results that we want it to yield, and nor does it solve anything. It never solves anything. So that's where, when I looked at Beth, and I would say, it seems like I have to figure out for a long time, and I haven't shared a lot of some of our story. Beth was a stay-at-home mom. Beth homeschooled all 5 of our kids, and she homeschooled for 20 years. So, and it started kind of with, she wasn't sure she wanted to do this, and she ended up teaching Eden at 4 how to read in 15 minutes a day with a phonics program, Alpha Phonics. I think you can probably go find it. It's a red book. No pictures, just letters, Alpha Phonics. And she spent 15 minutes a day teaching Eden to read. And Kate, our 3-year-old at the time, would literally look over Beth's shoulder as she's sitting with Eden, and Kate learned to read at the age of 3 also. So
Wow.
once my wife like experienced that joy, like, oh my goodness, my kid just read a sign on the side of the Mass Pike that says
Right.
Red Roof Inn. I can't even believe I nearly drove off the road when I heard it. We're driving along and all of a sudden Red Roof Inn. I was like, what? So
Yeah.
it set the hook in Beth, and she's like, I think I could do kindergarten. I could do 30 minutes a day, no problem. And 30 minutes a day becomes an hour a day with first grade, becomes an hour and a half a day with second grade, and before long you've homeschooled 5 kids and they're going to college. And anyway, so that's part of our story too.
I'm going to ask about that because we have considered homeschooling.
Yeah.
For various reasons, but that's something we have considered. So I'll have to pick your brain on that.
I saw a family in our church in Holden, Massachusetts, just north of Worcester, and they homeschooled their kids. And I thought, there's stereotypes around homeschooling family and they break the mold. So there's hope. There's hope that we could be a cool, athletic, well-adjusted, relational family and homeschool. And so that was what we pursued. But back to the money thing.
Yeah.
So Beth's not home working. I am the sole source of income, and I'm saying I think I need to figure out how to make more money. And so let's pray about it. Let's take it before the Lord and just be like, I'm going to release this, in the words of John Eldridge and Morgan Steiner. I'm going to release this to you, and I'm going to trust that you're going to give us what we need when we need it. You know the equation and all the inputs to the equation far better than I do. And even though I'm good at math and I can lean on my own understanding, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to acknowledge my ways and trust that you're going to order my steps. And he always did. Always, always, always. Even when the sole source of income lost his job and I went, this doesn't feel good. He's like, I got you. I got you. No problem. I just knew you needed the summer off. And so Memorial Day to Labor Day in 2009, I had the summer off. It was filled with some angst, but by Labor Day I had a job and God provided, and it was a good thing. So
that was a 3-month period. How many kids did you have?
We had all 5 at that point.
You had all 5.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
In Massachusetts.
This was here in Colorado, actually.
That's right, because you moved in 2005. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I remember when I got the job offer, I was at the Denver Zoo with the family and got the phone call. Mark, we want to extend an offer. I was like, no way. So good.
Yeah. Oh, praise God.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to do a second episode because I've got questions about homeschooling. I have more questions, but I did promise that I would.
It would be an honor, Keaton. Everything I have is yours. So
amen. Amen. And next time in Colorado, maybe I'll come and we'll do an in-person one.
I would love it. And not only that, my daughter, my Kate, and her husband Josh, they built the most amazing podcast room in their house.
No
so
way.
we could go do it there. Yeah.
Wait, what do they run a podcast?
They are in the process of starting a podcast, and they have a strong, massive heart for marriages, and so they're building a company that's all about a subscription service for creative dating. So they provide you with the dates, and you go do the dates with your bride, and they're catering to the needs of even like long distance relationships. If you're engaged over a long distance, how can you do some fun creative dating together over long distances, or whatever. So anyway, they're starting a podcast.
A genius idea.
Yeah, they're starting that as a side business, but they also have kind of a podcast to go along with it that's very relational. So once again, we start with the end in mind. It's like, I want my kids to be highly relational. Well, so there you go.
Oh, I would love it. I would love it.
And by the way, Keaton, I will say it gets so much cooler when your 5 kids get old and they start schooling your butt in all the strategy games that you like, including chess, and they're teaching you about the Lord and what they're studying in the Word. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the benefits that result in your kids teaching you and training you and having a modicum I will only say I have a modicum of humility. I'm not, but to be able to show up and go, teach me, Will, what did you learn? I want to know.
Yeah.
Because maybe I need to learn it. And it's just it's a beautiful thing.
So, amen.
Yeah.
Oh, well, my dad has said something similar.
I'm sure he has.
Yeah.
I'm not old enough to be your dad, but I can easily imagine he's learned a few things from you. Yeah.
I'm already really bad at chess. Like I'm embarrassingly bad at chess. I had my brother-in-law. We played, well, I guess a couple months now, and I had him cornered.
Dead to
won the game.
Totally.
I lost the game, and I play my brother. My brother's really good at chess. I've played him on the chess app, and I have I think they set you at a score of 1,200. His score, I think he's up at like 1,600, and I'm down at like 200.
No.
I'm so bad at chess. So bad. But Mark, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. This was a joy. Yeah. Thankful for you, brother. Thankful for your podcast. I've been learning a lot. So keep going.
Well, thank you for listening too. It's it's trying to stop the recording. It's taking its time.
This was so fun. And I haven't heard about this Riverside platform before. This is sweet.
Yeah, I think it's relatively new.
Okay.
With